So, you all know this lady, Margaret Thatcher, one of Britain's finest prime ministers. She was famous for her ruthlessness, resolve, authority, but also charisma. She was replaced by a man who became known as the nowhere man, the grey man, a puppet. He was her preferred choice, as she expected she would continue to be in control of the country as a backseat driver. However, under John Major's leadership, the Tories suffered one of the largest electoral defeats since 1832. Though John Major wasn't all bad, his shortcomings were simply highlighted because they were in such stark contrast with the charisma of his predecessor. Throughout history, politicians have used their charisma to rally support of large groups of people, to inspire them, to make changes, to do good. However, about 30 years ago, we saw a shift. Suddenly, charisma was being used to describe business leaders as well. So a photo like this, in the 1990s, of a president of a company dressed as a transsexual would have caused scandal. But today, this is another fantastic PR stunt by Sir Richard Branson, another demonstration of his charisma. The media flock to see this, and he manages to raise money for charity in the process. Of course, when we talk about charisma and business leader, we can't not talk about Steve Jobs. Upon his death, one of the first questions was, of course, who would succeed this man? Would they ever be able to find somebody to match his genius and his vision for Apple? But nowhere is charisma more necessary and vital than in the advertising industry. Creative industries cannot allow themselves to alternate between charismatic and bureaucratic leaders. We are so heavily dependent upon communication and personal relations, both internally and externally. That is why I wanted to explore this topic, to see how we can make it easier for the successor, how to help them develop in their own right and not live in the shadow of the charismatic leader. But to do this, I think that first we need to know what charisma is. So it's originally a Greek term adapted from Christian vocabulary from the Bible. It means gift of favor, gift of grace, a divinely inspired calling to lead. It was plucked out of obscurity by Max Weber, who's a German philosopher, and he used it to describe one of three types of authority. He saw it as a quality by which one is set apart and treated as endowed with supernatural, superhuman, or exceptional powers or qualities. Charismatic authority can stem from heroism or exemplary character, and the implication here is that the charismatic leader can inspire loyalty and devotion in others, which is unrelated to his status or position. Now that we know what charisma is, how do you get it? Where does it come from? Well, you might think that there's a list of characteristics. If you have them all, you are charismatic. But that's actually not the case. And this is one of the biggest criticisms of charisma, is that it's so hard to pinpoint. Based on what I said earlier, you might also think that the source is God. And that would be right if we were discussing charisma in terms of Christianity. But we're not. Based on all my research, I believe that the source of charisma is the relationship between a leader and followers. Charisma needs to be shown through actions in order for its existence to be proven. It's shown through interaction with followers, and they are the ones that ascribe it to the leader. So a leader cannot call himself charismatic, because that would be inauthentic. There are three things that need to fit together in order for charisma to emerge: the personality of the leader, the personality traits of the followers, and the context. When we talk about the personalities, what we actually mean are values. So there needs to be a value congruence, which is related to the attribution of charisma. So a leader must represent the values of his followers. To illustrate this, for example, if you ask this man, your typical oil baron from Texas, whether he thought that Bill Clinton was charismatic, he'd probably say hell no, because Bill Clinton stands for the exact opposite of what JR from Dallas stands for. Another important thing is context. So some argue that crisis situations are fertile for the emergence of charismatic leaders. Therefore, you might argue that charisma is not feasible in the business world today because there are no life or death crises. You might think that the era of profits is over and that organizations have become smooth operations that are not susceptible to frivolities such as charisma. But just look around you. See how many CEOs are featured in ads today. See how many company CEOs you can name compared to your parents 20 or 30 years ago. you will see that we live in an age that craves heroes and stories of extraordinary men and women with a vision. And finally, another important thing to remember about charisma is that it's value neutral. So you might people here talking about dictators and tyrants as charismatic, and that's not wrong to do, because you can use charisma for good and for the bad. Of course, in my thesis, I want to see what it's like to succeed a good charismatic leader, but I believe that something can be learned from the examples of misuse of charisma as well. When it comes to the research, of course, I focused on practical examples from advertising agencies, because that's the context that's relevant to me. So I looked at a case at DDB, then I looked at one at Saatchi & Saatchi, and finally I looked at a completely different context where I believed I could find some answers and draw some parallels. So firstly, I'd like to present to you the case at DDB. As most of you know, this man, Bill Bernbach, was one of the founders of DDB. He passed away in 1982. He was retired for a few years, but still actively involved within the agency. There was no direct successor as such, so I chose to investigate what happened with when Keith Reinhard joined the company in 1986 to head a three-way merger between DDB, BBDO, and Needham Harper. In order to understand this, I had a look at the DDB archive, which contained articles and press clippings from the time. I spoke to an employee, Kathleen Gordon, who had been with the agency for a long time and has worked closely with Keith. And finally, I spoke to Keith Reinhard himself. And several things are very interesting about this case, and I think that they are key learnings for any successor. So first of all, sorry to disappoint, but you will never fill the shoes of a charismatic leader. So Keith Reinhard had always wanted to work at DDB. His dream was to preserve the legacy of Bill Bernbach. He thought that no one had ever been able to improve upon the insights into creativity and human nature that Bill Bernbach formed. Even when Bernbach's son came to see Keith and asked him to succeed his father, he said, no one could ever succeed your father. So he had the utmost respect and admiration for his predecessor, but also absolute self-awareness of his own abilities and clarity on what his role was. Here it's really important to remember one thing, which is that Keith Reinhard never worked with Bill Bernbach. So probably the charisma that he had in mind was more of a reputation and was really intact as well, because the man had passed away. Second important thing is about using the myth. So charismatic leaders have a lot of myths surrounding them, even more so if they had passed away, and this really takes on a life of itself. So what Keith did was to use this in a very, very smart way. He published a book of Bill Bernbach's insights that was distributed around the world. He created the Bill Bernbach Award, which is given to a campaign within DDB that best expresses and conveys the creative values of Bill Bernbach. He sent out a weekly memo called Any Wednesday, which he used to remind people of these values, but also to blend them with his own. So when it came to change, such as implementing a new planning system, Keith was able to do this by sort of basing it on the values that everybody was so familiar with. And change was a much less painful process than it normally is. Finally, it may seem obvious, but it's important to have friends. Keith Reinhard faced a lot of opposition on his journey at DDB, not least from one of the founders, Ned Doyle, who thought that Bernbach should be left on his own and not revived in this way. But he did have some key creative stars on his side. And this is essential, not only because you can't be alone against everyone and because you need a support network, but because these people have networks of their own, networks of people that they influence and to whom they're able to pass on the message of you, and that you're actually a good person that has the interest of the company at heart. So this is good charisma, and it's sort of nice and easy to research and to understand. But a different case gave me altogether different conclusions, some of which are quite contradicting to this. The case of Saatchi & Saatchi. So the famous duo shaped the industry in the 70s and 80s. Charles is the older one, the aloof one. He liked to cultivate an air of mystery. And Morris was the younger one, the charismatic one. They went on a massive acquisition spree in the 70s and 80s. They bought up a lot of companies, some of which weren't even in advertising. And in this process, a holding company was created. However, the brothers got a bit carried away. Even though the company was publicly traded, they still acted as though it was their own. So they had massive compensation, they held expensive premises, they weren't involved with the clients, and worst of all, they wouldn't allow for the name of the holding company to change, even though it was causing confusion because there was an agency inside it that shared the same name. But they wouldn't hear of it. So this, accompanied by a protest from shareholders, led to Morris Sacchi being fired as chairman by the board of directors in 1995. The blow to the company's public image was even worse because the whole drama was played out in public because of Morris's great relations with the media, all thanks to his charisma. Of course, after a few days, his brother followed, left the company as well, and they went on to form MNC Sacchi. To make the matters worse, they took a few key employees with them. So there wasn't, again, a direct successor as such. I guess nobody really wanted to take on a job like this at a sinking ship. So to understand what happened at Sacchi & Sacchi, I relied on a book which details the events that led to Morris's firing in '95. And I interviewed Simon Good, who worked at a management level within the advertising agency, Sacchi & Sacchi. So the learnings I came up with are, as I said, in contrast with what I learned at DDB. So the first one is that one cannot be stronger than the organization. When the individual is more powerful than the organization, he or she can do what they like, and there's no way to control them. But more importantly, you cannot expect employees not to get attached to that one person and make it difficult for any sort of succession to occur. The other thing is about identity and culture that shouldn't be related to one person. So again, this is the dark side of charisma. If you have somebody that strong that the story is based around, what do you do afterwards? And I guess Keith Reinhardt had, I suppose you can call it an advantage, because Bill Bernbach couldn't do anything to damage his reputation because he was dead. But within a company like Sacchi & Sacchi, this was very different, and it was all about the brothers, and nobody else really mattered. Furthermore, it should be that leaders reflect the values of the company and not the other way around. And this is something that must be remembered for creative organizations. Lastly, I think there's something to be said about promoting from within. So it's common practice nowadays to get people from the outside to lead the company because they're seen as less attached and that they will be able to implement change at a faster pace. But when I spoke to Simon Good, he said that 2 new young CEOs were promoted from within Sacchi & Sacchi. They did a tremendous job repairing the company, but they also did a lot for the morale of the people that were really sort of upset and devastated at the time. So this sort of a move can actually demonstrate confidence in the people, prospects for others, but it can also, in the right circumstances, give you a longer transitional period because you can groom somebody for the leadership role without them even being aware of it. And the last case is a case that I heard about in Belgrade in a school near me. It's the case of the charismatic teacher. So there's a boy called Sergei who is 13 years old, and something very upsetting happened to him in his class at the beginning of the academic year. So his beloved Serbian teacher, Maria, was suddenly replaced without any explanation by the librarian, an older lady who had been out of teaching for a long time and wasn't really talented for it, I suppose would be a nice way of putting it. But also she spoke badly of her predecessor, she scraped the system altogether, she was not interested in knowing, how the kids have worked with Maria before, and this caused really bad reactions from the children. They were very upset, and from their parents, who went on to complain to the school. So in order to understand what had passed here, why the children's reaction was so strong, I spoke to Maria, first of all, to understand her relationship with the children. Then I spoke to her tutor group, because they know her the best. And finally, I spoke to Sergei's class. In terms of the methods that I used, with Maria's tutor group, I conducted a group interview, followed by an anonymous questionnaire. And with Sergei's class, I also conducted a group interview. And the questions were pretty much the same, the questions that we covered. I just wanted to see if there was any difference between what they would say in front of the teacher versus what they would say anonymously. The questions were like, do you like your Serbian teacher? Why? What are her positive traits? What are her flaws? What could she do differently in order to improve her classes? And the results were interesting, but there was one thing that really stuck out. What Maria thinks her role is and what pupils think Maria's role is are not the same thing. In fact, they're quite different, and there's a big discrepancy. Maria's role, according to Maria, is first and foremost to be a pedagogue, so to raise these children to be good adults. Then to be a teacher, so to pass on this knowledge of Serbian that she needs to do according to the syllabus. Then she mentions openness and honesty. This is something that she places great value on, so much so that she prefers them not to do their homework as long as they come out clean about it and say, look, I didn't do it, I forgot. And finally, her role is to create a collective. So she talks about the fact that when she started working with Sergei's class 2 years back, the children were very much to themselves. But she managed to help them become friends, look out for each other, and support each other. According to the pupils, however, Maria's role is much more complex. So to them, she's a role model, she's a moral guide, she solves problems, she motivates, she breaks barriers, she creates a team and leads it, and she's an arbiter of justice. So based on these two different views of the same thing, and the things that happened after Maria was replaced by the new teacher, I came to certain conclusions that I think are useful for any successor. So firstly, it's really important to study the ways of your predecessor. If the new teacher had spoken to Maria, she would have learnt about her way of doing things and her methodology. Scraping the system altogether, which is essentially what the new teacher did by ignoring the way that things were done previously, leads to rejection of leadership. And it leads to the followers feeling unsafe because of uncertainty and feeling that they are not in control at all. Of course, Keith Reinhardt took this to the next level, really, because I think I got the impression from all my research that he became really the authority of Bill Bernbach, and that the cult of personality behind Bill Bernbach wasn't so 30 years ago as it is now, thanks to him. And then the next learning is really about managing expectations. So it's important to have this conversation as soon as possible, to know what the expectations of the followers are, what the expectations of the leader are. And Maria never had this with the children, which is why the fall for them was so hard. And I guess this can be applied to Sachi and Sachi as well, because they probably had the conversation with Morris at a really late point. There was some attempts at communication of, you should do this and not this. But this was at a point where it was completely useless, and there was a huge misunderstanding because he wasn't receptive to it. He saw his role as something else. Now that we know all this, what do we do with it? Well, I'm sure most of you are familiar with these two men. The story of Manchester United actually blends together terms that overlap in the discussion of charisma. Succession, change, transition, and all of those are covered really well by different disciplines. So if we talk about change, we should go to Kotter's 8 steps. But here we see the difference between charisma and succession. The former is very much a live thing, and the latter is more about wrestling with the past. And in this example, we saw probably the popular understanding of charisma and succession. Look for somebody just like you, same interests, same background, from same city but different neighborhoods, and that should guarantee success. But it doesn't, because as you all know, this sort of ended in tears only 10 months after David Moyes had taken on the role at Manchester United. There's another thing that crept up on me every time whilst doing research for this thesis, and that is the expression that we often use when talking about successful people, which is that you have big shoes to fill. So if the person that you're taking over from has done a good job, you will have a tough time trying to do the same thing. That is the implication, right? But what bothered me, and I realized this on my last day of the time off I took to write this thesis at the absolute last minute, and I was jumping around like a Bambi, really happy about it, is that I have a problem because it's one pair of shoes. I don't understand that as a woman. We don't function in this way. This phrase must have been thought of by a man. Because women play many different parts in their lives. So they're mothers, wives, bosses, daughters, sisters, friends. And for all those roles, she was Ronald Reagan's friend. So for all those roles, we have different shoes that support us, and otherwise this happens. Can you imagine the sadistic person that's sort of running in heels There's actually an event that supports this kind of behavior. So we need different shoes to help us get through those roles. So I propose to you a model, which is called the 7 types of shoes that every successor must have. It's a framework for any successor of a charismatic leader. Because, like women, he or she will have many contradictory roles to play. For example, they might have to be a guardian of a legacy and agents of change at the same time. This framework provides a set of tools which will help the successor model their behavior in relation to the organization and on an individual level, so both internally and externally. So the first type, which corresponds to the role of the custodian, are the old shoes. So however you feel about the old shoes, those of the charismatic leader, you need them. You may find them old and ugly, like the librarian probably did, and just want to throw them away. Or you might think they're too beautiful, like Keith Reinhardt did, and you might want to just keep them in a museum. Whatever your feeling is, they are there for you to keep and remind you of what the organization is about, what is the legacy that you have inherited, and what it actually means for you and your leadership. The next type are the combat boots, which correspond to the role of a soldier. So as with any transitional period and time of adjustment, the successor will have to do a lot of hard work, and oftentimes on unfriendly land. There will be many unknown situations that will require skills, resistance, stability, and sometimes sheer force. Through this hard work, you demonstrate certain characteristics to your followers, based on which they will make a judgment and form an opinion about you. So combat boots are suitable for this sort of hard work, and they protect you at the same time and give you stability. So it's actually all about the individual powering through the different obstacles and challenges. And again, this is exactly what Keith Reinhardt did when he had to overcome all the tricks that were being played on him within the organization that he joined. The third type are sports shoes and being a team player. And this is something on an individual basis. It's about, the introspection and knowing when to sort of stop and do something else. So there's a phrase which goes, work hard and play hard. I'm sure you've heard about it. There's even a stupid song that's called work hard and play hard. It's a phrase which is often used as a motto. So it implies that people who work hard and have stressful jobs relax in the same intense manner. So a leader needs time to relax and have interest outside of work. The work will be hard, the hours will be long, and in order not to burn out, you need to find time to play and compete outside of work. But at the same time, it's about knowing how to play at work. It's about creating a good and fun atmosphere where you can create good relations with your colleagues in a more effective way and faster way than you were if you just stuck to the formalities. This is my favorite type. So stilettos are about being the illusionist. As most of you know, stilettos are a health hazard for women, but we still wear them. They give the optical illusion of a longer, slimmer leg and greater height. Posture changes, and so does the way we walk. Sometimes we need the support of a higher heel in order to project that illusion and make ourselves feel more confident. The successor will need this a lot of the time, but especially in the beginning, when faced with opposition and when doubt creeps up, even to the most confident of characters. So stilettos are there to fake it until you become it. And this is something on an individual, introspective level where you have to sort of keep going and pick yourself up when you're down because nobody else is going to do it for you. The next type are ballet shoes, which correspond to the role of the tactician. So they fit closely to the foot. They give feet maximum flexibility, which is needed in order to perform these various figures and jumps and pirouettes that are done in ballet. As a leader successor, one will require these frequently. They are needed in order to maneuver all the tricky situations that will occur. They do give feet a gentle and fragile appearance, but actually this type of shoe helps them remain sturdy throughout all the difficult things. Like ballet, the role of the successor is to work hard, show strength, even when you're not feeling it, and do much of your work behind the scenes, only for that one performance which everybody will see. So similarly, being a tactician requires one to be in tune with the music or the organization, but also show delicacy and sensitivity in the way you go about doing things and implementing change. Next type are the Oxford shoes. They're a traditional, formal, but also a plain choice. Organizations, no matter how old they are, have a certain set of traditions, rules, formalities that must be respected. So even if you wish to turn your organization upside down, you need to do it according to a certain set of rules. And there are certain things that cannot be touched. So the Oxfords are for such occasions. And finally, no shoes. So it's the social norm that almost at all times, while out in the public, humans should wear shoes. And only in certain places and occasions can you be barefoot. And this is not one of them. I don't know if you've seen me. So I'm rebelling. So not wearing shoes is sometimes viewed as an act of rebellion too. Having a rebellious streak can really help you. So you'll be under a lot of pressure frequently. You may sometimes become fearful or too eager to please somebody else. But even when it's clear when something difficult needs to be done, going against the current is very difficult, especially at an early stage when you don't have so many friends. But going barefoot and making a run for it will go a long way towards ensuring that change is implemented. It demonstrates courage, it demonstrates confidence in one's decision and vision. Of course, the true wisdom lies in knowing when the right time to go barefoot is. Clearly, I lack that vision. So what next? Well, I believe that this is not something that is set in stone, so it doesn't mean that you have to play every role in equal measure all the time. It's simply a framework which makes you think about all the different roles that you play, all the different things that you mean to various people within your organization. But also it's about managing yourself through this process. And I believe that this framework can be used even after you've passed this succession stage of work. So each to their own, really. You know, pick and choose as you like. And while you can't fill big shoes, I believe that there are many different shoes that you can fill. Thank you.